Mr. President, last week the Congressional Budget Office issued a report that our Congressional Budget Office, the leadership selected by the majority in the Congress, the Democratic majority, and that report showed that our deficit for this year that will end September 30th will be $1.5 trillion. That's the largest deficit the nation has ever had. The last 2 years have been $1.3, $1.2 trillion, and this one is projected to come in at 1.5. We complained, I've complained, that President Bush spent more money than he should, but his highest deficit was 1/3 of that, $450 billion. The year before, so we are at unprecedented levels of annual deficit and debt. Our gross debt, the total debt of the United States, internal and external, will equal by the end of the year 100% of GDP. Annual interest payments. We borrow money. People loan us their money. We give them treasury bills and bonds in exchange, and we pay them interest on the debt. Our interest, the amount of interest we pay, will rise to $750 billion by the end of this decade, meaning that a one-year interest payment will cost us nearly as much as 20 years of current highway construction spending. We spend about $40 billion a year, for example, on federal highway expenditures. We're talking about a debt going from $170 or so billion interest payment of $170 billion or so a couple of years ago to $750 because our debt will triple in that time, from $5 trillion to over $15 trillion. The total amount of interest we expect to pay between now and the end of the decade is $5.5 trillion in interest, enough money to fund our entire government for 18 months. The situation is so serious that former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan warned very recently that we may face a bond market crisis in the next 2 to 3 years. He said, it's a little better than 50-50 chance that won't happen, but not much better, was his comment. CBO Director Doug Elmendorf testified last week before the Budget Committee, where I'm ranking member, that we were entering, quote, unfamiliar territory for all developed nations over the last several decades, close quote. Unfamiliar territory. He's talking about financially. Debt is what he's talking about. Analysts with the Standard & Poor's stated that, quote, absent a credible plan, the rating on the U.S. government will come under pressure, close quote. In other words, the rating on our debt, will it cease to be AAA? And if that happens, won't our interest rates that I've just been suggesting are threatening us, those interest rates will go up, because if our ratings go down, people will demand a higher interest before they'll loan us money. Two prominent economists, Professor Carmen Reinhart, who's testified before our committee, I think more than once, and Dr. Kenneth Rogoff, issued a paper explaining the negative impact of excessive debt on economic growth. They actually wrote a book. This time it's different. They studied in the last 200 years the countries that have had their economies collapse as a result of debt. A lot of the South American countries have had it various times, Argentina and others. And they caution that there is a point beyond which you do not want to go. And that point is when your debt equals 90% of your economy, 90% of GDP. That's a very respected study. First time anyone's ever studied economies that have had economic collapse. And this is a key factor in that. We're now at 94% of GDP, and by the end of the year, the CBO projects we'll be at 100% of GDP. Our debt will equal 100% of the entire goods and services produced in this economy. So our nation is on a dangerous, and as everybody that we've had who've testified before the committee, and virtually anybody that's expressed themselves, they call it an unsustainable path. The president said we're on an unsustainable path. So we need strong leadership from our president. The day before his State of the Union, I wrote an op-ed, it was published in the Washington Post. I called on him to present a broad vision for reducing spending. I said that, quote, his proposals cannot be timid, close quote, and that this was, quote, a defining moment for his presidency. I have to say, he did not rise to that occasion. Instead of a bold vision, he put forward a meek plan to continue spending at current levels for 5 more years, calling that a freeze, but we've had a surge in spending the last 2 years. Freezing at that level cannot be acceptable. These are the levels that produced the $1.5 trillion deficit. So the president's speech, I must say, was disconnected, I say with care, from reality. He nowhere in that speech entered into a dialogue with the American people about the severity of the crisis we face, or made any attempt to call on them in a serious way to understand why it is that we can't continue at this level of spending. He failed to present a credible plan. So this is what the Washington Post said in an editorial yesterday. They weren't mean-spirited about it, but you could tell they were very disappointed. They said this, quote, in his State of the Union address Tuesday night, President Obama failed to present a credible plan for long-term debt reduction. It's no secret we think he made a big mistake. If America can't get a handle on its finances, everything else is at risk, close quote. But not only has the president failed to lead with ideas, he has set about to thwart, to block others from taking action. This is concerning to me. This Sunday, at one of the big news programs, his new chief of staff, Bill Daley, balked at a Republican plan to cut spending for the rest of the year. Daley said any budget cuts must be paired with new spending, quote, investments, close quote, as he and the president called them. He taunted the Republicans, I think, with, where's the beef? Let's see the cuts they're talking about, close quote. So the president refuses to lead and then sends his emissaries to attack any Republican who makes a serious program. I assume as being heartless, kind, wanting to throw children in the streets, and so forth. For instance, the president's chief economic advisor, Austin Goolsbee, lashed out at Republicans for wanting to reduce discretionary spending before we raise the debt ceiling. I mean, we have to have some sort of bipartisan agreement before we agree to raise this debt ceiling that we're going to reduce some of the spending, clip back on the credit card a little bit, something significant. The president's own Secretary of Treasury, Tim Geithner, recently argued that it was too early to begin cutting the deficits. Yeah, it's unsustainable. Yeah, it's unsustainable, but it's too early to start cutting now. Maybe 2012? After that, maybe? Geithner's comments ring all too similar to those of his predecessor, Hank Paulson, Secretary of Treasury under President Bush, who said that the housing downturn was under control before the Wall Street firms began falling like dominoes. But ignoring the reality of our situation does not change it. The money simply isn't there to support the president's spending agenda that he announced at the State of the Union. We don't have the money. Our nation cannot afford another era of big government. In 2 weeks, on February 14th, just 2 weeks from now, the President will submit a new budget to Congress. It will go to our committee, the Budget Committee. This may be, and I say this seriously, his last chance to get it right, for the President to be a credible voice in this debate. And he must put forward a budget that significantly lowers spending levels. He cannot present Congress with the same unserious plan he presented last Tuesday night. 3 years into his term, I think this budget that he'll be submitting is a defining act of what he views and how he views the debt we face. I think if this budget fails to meet the necessary demands for curtailing spending, we will know pretty conclusively where the President is. You know, numbers count. You can have rhetoric and we can disagree, but at some point you have to put out your budget that says what you're going to do, how much you're going to spend, and where you're going to get the money. In this case, how much are we going to borrow to carry on the government at that time. And so we're going to see whether the President is moving with the American people to fiscal and economic sanity, or whether or not he will continue his ideological commitment to big government. I think that's it. I think we'll know in 2 weeks. That's a serious matter. So I think we need to turn back from the cliff toward which we are heading and get on a new road. We need to reduce both the size of the deficit and we'll have to reduce the size of the government somewhat. We're not going to sink into the ocean. We go back to 2008, 2006 levels of federal spending. Will the country collapse? Give me a break. Certainly it's not going to collapse, but it'll put us on a road to fiscal sanity. It will restore not only public confidence in our economy, but it will really restore the foundations of American prosperity. I truly believe one of the clouds over the American economy is the perception, unfortunately too true, that we're spending at a reckless rate, that we are irresponsibly running up debt that could cause us to inflate the value of our currency, that could cause a debt crisis, as Mr. Greenspan said was almost a 50-50 chance in the next 2 to 3 years. And if you've got money to invest, what does that say to you? Maybe you better sit back and see a little bit more until we get this debt that's spiraling out of control, under control, heading on a downward path toward a balanced budget. We're not going to see the economic growth that's possible. I don't know I think that's where we should be heading. So strong, sustained reductions in spending will not be easy. It'll take us down a tough road, but it's the only road, the only course that will lead to a better financial future for ourselves and our children and preserve the integrity of the United States economy in a way that is necessary for growth to occur. I thank the chair and would yield the floor and note the absence of quorum.